Turn in your Bibles, if you would, to Job chapter 27. Job 27. That Bible over there. We have Job's continued response or reply to Zophar's speech. And one commentator suggested that Job's closing statement to the discussion with his three friends balances out what he started off with in chapter 3. And this is his last response. After this, we're going to get 3 chapters from Job on God's wisdom and some other facets there as well, not necessarily responses to the friends. But this is the last chapter, the end of the cycles of statements from his friends and Job's replies. Then we'll have 3 chapters again on the wisdom from Job, and then 3 or maybe it's 4, I can't remember, chapters of that young, what's his name? Elihu? Yeah, Elihu. He's going to say a few things that we'll probably combine those into one lesson. But here, in these remarks from Job, nowhere do we see, either here or throughout all his speeches that he's had so far, of him denying the justice of God. It is not inconsistent for him to affirm it here. The disagreement that we read about from Job and from his friends that's going on between them two is not whether God is just or not, but it's over how the justice of God is seen to work out in particular events, and specifically in Job's experiences. And you'll notice how this starts is a little different. Excuse me. Look at very, very beginning, verse 1. Then Job continued his discourse and said. Now that's different because if you look in chapter 26, then Job responded. And then you turn back in chapter 23, then Job replied. Further back, then Job answered. And it's continued like that, except for here, then Job continued his discourse and said. So, we see he's going to assert his innocence. He's already done that several times, and he's affirming, again, his integrity, opposing these charges from his friends. And when he opens up with this, continued his discourse, in the Hebrew, the introductory formula is repeated again in chapter 29. We'll see that pop up one more time. You could translate this as he's going to take up a discourse. This is some wonder, and I almost wonder also, is this the beginning of his wisdom discussion that he's going into? But it also looks like he's replying still to Zophar, so I don't know. Maybe we'll figure that out as we work through this. But I want to break it up into these 3 sections. We'll start with verses 1 through 6, Job's integrities affirmed. So Job continued his discourse and said, "As God lives, who has taken away my right, and the Almighty who has embittered my soul. For as long as life is in me, and the breath of God is in my nostrils, my lips certainly will not speak unjustly, nor will my tongue mutter deceit. Far be it from me that I should declare you right. Till I die, I will not put away my integrity from me. I hold fast my righteousness and will not let it go. My heart does not reproach any of my days." So, kind of like an oath, wouldn't you say? Maybe that Job is getting here. He's giving this oath. And it begins with that, "as God lives." So when someone says that, what are they saying? Like, "as God lives." What do you think he's saying?
As sure as God lives,
Yeah.
this other thing is going to be true.
Yeah. And his friends know, he knows God does live. That's the most sure thing they have. He's using that to show how strongly he feels about this. He knows this to be true. He may not be able to point to evidence of these things as his friends want, but then again, they also don't have evidence of his sin. But there are things that back up his claim. And he goes on, "For as long as life is in me, and the breath of God is in my nostrils. So as a condition which will keep Job faithful to his oath, he recognizes God's the giver of breath. And the actual oath is found in verse 4. My lips certainly will not speak unjustly, nor will my tongue mutter deceit. What's the deceit he's talking about that he will not utter?
That he's been unrighteous at that.
Yeah, I think so, because he's talking to his friends. They've been urging him to admit whatever enormous sin they think he's had. And so Job is vehemently denying that through this dialogue. And this made me think of some Shakespeare. I've been reading a little bit of Shakespeare lately because I know it's coming for the kids here soon. So I've been kind of looking at some of those things. And there was this quote that Shakespeare had from Hamlet. And it said, "This above all, to thine own self be true, and it must follow as the night the day, thou canst not then be false to any man." You remember that? Do you guys remember reading that? Nope. Well, I thought that was interesting. Yeah, Alex is like, no, I haven't read that. Well, it made me think of that. But he's denying what his friends have been accusing him of. Far be it from me, he says in verse 5. It's introducing a second oath here. Satan's confidently affirmed that Job would deny God if calamities were brought upon him. Nevertheless, this didn't happen. Throughout the speeches, Job, what? He continually affirmed his integrity over and over again. So he held fast his righteousness, and he will not let it go. My heart does not reproach any of my days. He's saying there he's got a clear conscience. He's got a clear conscience. Just like Paul. Remember Paul made that comment? I've had a clear conscience since when, does he say? Yeah, from my youth. Yeah, from my youth. So always, even when he was a Jew persecuting the Christians, he had clear conscience. Job is saying, I look back and I can see nothing I've done wrong. But all we know of Job is that his standard has been what? The standard of God. Holding fast to those truths. He can see nothing that he has done wrong. He's asked his friends to point to him. What have I done? And what could they point to? Except that, well, look at all the things that's happened to you. We see bad things happening to other people. Bad things are happening to you. You must be a sinner. So right off the bat, he's holding on and affirming his integrity. He goes on in verses 7 through 23. He's going to show here's what the godless really are. He's going to break that up into two parts. What is the hope of the godless and their true portion? Verses 7 through 12 is that first part. May my enemy be as the wicked, and my opponent as the unjust. For what is the hope of the godless when he is cut off, when God requires his life? Will God hear his cry when distress comes upon him? Will he take delight in the Almighty? Will he call on God at all times? I will instruct you in the power of God. What is the Almighty, I will not conceal. Behold, all of you have seen it. Why then do you act foolishly? So Job is showing here that God does punish the ungodly for their wicked deeds. In this part of the alienation, I think he felt, as it seemed, that he was being treated, he feels like God's treating him like God would treat the sinners, those who are unrighteous. But he's not one of those things. So his enemy, referring to his opponents, are those who fought against him. Now, who do you think that might be? Right there in the opening verse there in verse 7. May my enemy be as the wicked and my opponent as the unjust. Who is his enemy and who's his opponent? Do you, yeah, I think so, because he makes that statement, and then at the end of this section, why then do you act foolishly? He wants them to understand the instruction, and I think that's who he's looking at. They are his opponent. They are his enemy, trying to get him to do something, and what they're trying to get him to do is actually a sin. and he's not going to do it. So, Paul told the Gentile Christians that they were once separate from Christ, having no hope and without God in the world. I was really hoping I would be able to do this lesson after I preached Sunday morning, but as you know, I didn't get to preach Sunday morning. And it was on hope. It was a lesson, and one of the statements I was going to make was that phrase, "there is no hope," one of the saddest comments in the English language. And I was thinking about this passage. These people have no hope. And Paul tells the Ephesians that they were once like that. He also says that in 1 Thessalonians 4:13, or when he instructed believers not to grieve the death of loved ones, as do the rest who have no hope. Even the writer of Hebrews says in Hebrews 6:19, "This hope we have as an anchor of the soul, a hope both sure and steadfast, and one which enters within the veil." And these that he's talking about, they don't have that hope. Will God hear the cry of the godless when distress comes upon them? He will not. Nor do they take delight in the Almighty or call on God at all times. Job says in verse 11, he has seen the power of God manifested in his world all his life. He did not need his friends to instruct him about God's power. The fact he felt that power in his personal circumstances had caused, I think, his great perplexity in his suffering. Why is this happening? You remember when I think it was a few lessons ago, we talked about how it almost seems like that Job is taking on the same ideas that his friends do, that God does not punish the righteous, or that the righteous live better lives. He kind of hints at these ideas a few times. And it's almost as if he did probably have that same mentality, but now that he's going through this rough time, he's starting to think, well, I haven't done anything wicked or sinful to deserve this. So I don't know, this is my supposition. I almost wonder if maybe he did have that same mentality as his friends, but now this situation has gotten him thinking about this, and he no longer sees it that way because he hasn't done anything, and he knows he hasn't done anything. So maybe this is a learning episode for him as well. And God knew how he would react because God knows the future. And so verse 12, he accuses his friends of acting foolishly, or literally become vain with vain things, empty. So it is an intensification of the worthlessness that Job is attributing to his friends. Totally worthless and empty and of no good. So what is the hope of the godless? Well, they have no hope. They have no hope, not when they're without God. They need God. They want to have that. And so then he goes on at 13 to 23, the portion of a wicked man. This is the portion of a wicked man from God, and the inheritance which tyrants receive from the Almighty. Though his sons are many, they are destined for the sword, and his descendants will not be satisfied with bread. His survivors will be buried because of the plague, and their widows will not be able to weep. Though he piles up silver like dust and prepares garments as plentiful as the clay, he may prepare it, but the just will wear it, and the innocent will divide the silver. He has built his house like the spider's web, or as a hut which the watchman has made. He lies down rich, but never again. He opens his eyes, and it is no longer. Terrors overtake him like a flood. A tempest steals him away in the night. The east wind carries him away, and he is gone. For it whirls him away from his place, for it will hurl at him without sparing. He will surely try to flee from its power. Men will clap their hands at him and will hiss him from his place. So here Job is discussing the weakness, right, of wicked men. And some say that this is a contradiction between what he said in chapter 24, where he was pondering the fact that they were not punished immediately. That's where I wonder if maybe he's got that same mentality as the as his friends do. And maybe it's not a contradiction. Maybe it's more of him looking at it from different time periods or a different way. Or maybe it's more of him coming to a realization of what is actually going on in this situation with him and with God. And so verse 13, he's got that description of the portion, the inheritance. Both those words indicate a sharing of the booty of whatever inheritance is there. And their use, it represents a form of irony that appears everywhere else we see in the book. What's going to happen to all that they have? Well, that it won't go to the tyrants. They will not keep it. In verses 14 to 23, he gives a detailed description of all those calamities that come upon those who refuse to serve God. His sons are many, but they're destined for the sword. What does that mean? I mean, we know what that means, but as far as for the wicked, the godless, what does that mean? His sons are many, but they're destined for the sword. Okay, damnation. Large numbers would fail to guarantee his family line. What happened to Saul's family line? Wiped out. What happened to most of the kings of Judah and Israel, their family lines? What happened to them? Wiped out. God took them out in one way or another. Didn't matter how many kids or how big their family was, they were wiped out. His descendants will not be satisfied with bread. So this hardship was previously described over in chapter 24 as well. But those oppressed by the wicked, but his descendants will fall into hard times as well. His survivors will be buried because of the plague. That makes me think of the curse that God promised upon those who would not obey him to his people. Of course, not. I think this probably happened prior to that, but famine was used by the Lord even prior to that. Their widows will not be able to weep. That would suggest that the wicked man was a polygamist, I guess. However, most versions render it as a plural there in reference to the widows, survivors. But they would be so overwhelmed surrounding the plague that they would have no time to mourn. They would have to keep on moving on with their lives with all that's happening. Their silver, their garments, the just, the innocent. He mentions there in verse 16 and 17. And it's noted elsewhere in the wisdom literature that all these things that they have will be given to others. They will not keep it. And then, with that verse 18 and 19, their riches will disappear. The wicked man had built his house like a spider's web, and it just easily is plucked and falls apart. On and on. He continues to go on to show that in the end, what do they have left? In the end, they die. Whether it's through natural causes, through death in this life, whatever it is, they will face the judgment. And again, we need to note that these are generalizations. They don't apply to every wicked person in all circumstances, but those who follow in that path generally find themselves in this kind of situation. And chapter 7 completes that cycle of speeches between Job and his friends. They came to no resolution that we see, right? To the problem of the innocent suffering. And that's why I wonder if maybe this is just where Job comes to a realization of what's really going on here, because it's here where all this ends. And then we get some wisdom literature from Job for 3 chapters, and then Elihu has a bunch of things where there's no response given to him, and then the Lord comes. But this discussion back and forth between him and his friends go on, and then Job makes this comment, and that's it. It's like this is where God wanted him to get to, I wonder. What do you think? That's what's been going on in my mind, but what do you think? Alex?
I read that chapters 26 and 27 in the Hebrew is called a parable.
Yeah, I saw that.
It means an authoritative discourse. And it's almost like Job has distilled down in his mind really what he's thinking.
Yeah.
And now I'm going to tell you with authority that this is where I'm at, and this is where evil, those that oppose God, are at. And I'm going to tell it to you in a very distilled down message with authority now. And then that's it.
Yeah, and I think you're right. I think that whether he's already knew it or maybe he come to the realization of it, he's brought it down. He said, listen to this. That's like we said in the very opening. He continued his discourse and said, and of course we'll see that in chapter 29 also. He lays it out succinctly, and then this discourse between them ends. That's the end of it.
Yes, and it's that word discourse that the Hebrew is actually comparable.
Like a truth throne.
Yeah.
We'll see it again in chapter 29, but I do wonder if it's almost like he's carrying on his thought from chapter 3. Where like his chapter 3 was when that's his first thing he said to his friends, where he's trying to figure out what's going on. This is what he was wanting. I think it's like when you're wondering about something and you need to talk it out with somebody. And we talked about this before. You talk it out with somebody and you can come to a realization. And he's hoping to talk this out with his friends, and of course, they don't give him what he needs at all. And so he goes back to it on his own. He has been thinking about this. He's been talking about it. They haven't. And he's come to this realization, you know what, this is what it is. This is what it is, and here it is. And he lays it out. And that's the way I see it.
Yeah, and you almost wonder,
Okay.
in between chapters 26 and 27, it's almost like he takes a break to ask them what their response is. Like, what do you got to say about this? It's like halfway through this thought process, and it's almost like they were like, I don't know what to say in response to that. They just silence. They're like, okay, let me think this up some more then.
Well, let me finish putting this nail into your coffin. So, looking at this, we know what Satan's purpose was. What was his purpose with Job? What was he wanting Job to do?
He was wanting to turn against God.
Okay, so when we look back, chapter 1, and it's verse 7, the Lord said to Satan, from where do you come from? Or from where do you come? Then Satan answered the Lord and said, from roaming about on the earth and walking around it. The Lord said to Satan, have you considered my servant Job? For there is no one like him on the earth, a blameless and upright man, fearing God and turning away from evil. Then Satan answered the Lord, does Job fear God for nothing? Have you not made a hedge about him in his house and all that he has on every side? You have blessed the work of his hands, and his possessions have increased in the land. But put forth your hand now and touch all that he has. He will surely curse you to your face. Does he? Did he understand what was happening? In all the chapters we've looked at and everything we've seen him say, has he understood what was going on? What about right here in chapter 27, this last section? Do you think he feels like he understands what's going on now? Does he get it? What happens to the unrighteous? What's the state of the godless? Over in chapter 24, he makes it clear that it looks like nothing's happening to them. Here, he says that things can happen to them right here. And if not here, it'll happen later. God's judgment will come. He knows this, and he sees this. But he believes that he will be justified. In the very first few verses, as God lives, who has taken away my right, and the Almighty who has embittered my soul, for as long as life is in me and the breath of God is in my nostrils, my lips certainly will not speak unjustly, nor will my tongue mutter deceit. I'm not going to sin. I think he knows whether he gets his opportunity in this life to present his case before the Lord, or when he dies and goes out, he will get that day in court and he'll be found guiltless. He knows it. He doesn't understand it, but I think he's really come to that realization that I haven't done anything wrong. I haven't. And whatever happens to me, I will be in heaven with the Lord. I think he knows that. And I think that's why it comes to the end here. God help us and give us strength to handle difficult situations. Paul tells us in 1 Corinthians that, he would never put us in a situation that we cannot overcome. Why does God allow bad things to happen to us? Or why does God, let me put it this way. Why does God discipline us, as the Hebrew writer puts it? Why does he discipline us? Can he make us stronger? In what way? Trust in him, not in our own. Maybe to get us to wake up, come to an understanding, a little better understanding of his truths. I wonder if God allowed this to happen to Job so that Job could come to a better, stronger understanding. He knew what Satan was going to do. And Satan thought he knew what he could do to make Job do whatever he wanted. Did Satan know that God knows everything? You think so? It seems like he didn't. If God said he's upright and blameless, what do you think of him, Satan? You take away all his stuff, he'll curse you to the face. Go ahead and try it. I mean, certainly Satan would have known, this would be useless. But apparently he thought he could do it. He could make it happen.
Well, I guess that goes to the free will that man has. I mean, he knew the character of Job. God knew the character of Job, but I guess Satan felt like, in spite of his good character, think about what he said about Job. He said, think about my servant Job. There was no one else like him on the face of the earth.
Yeah.
Can you imagine? I mean, the earth must have been pretty well populated at this point.
Pretty close to the flood, maybe.
Every soul, and to identify Job as being such a righteous and upstanding person, what a compliment to Job that out of all the people on the face of the earth, he was superior to all of them at that point. That's amazing.
Oh, yeah.
And so, I mean, I think that God felt like there would be no way, based on his character, that he would reject him and curse him. But Satan felt like if he put him through enough torment, that he could get him to turn.
And even when he failed the first time, he went back and said, well, let me touch him. And he will.
Right.
He is so arrogant. He thought he could do it. He could overcome what God knows, make things change for what he thinks it should be. Nick.
It's not like Satan doesn't have some small victories throughout history.
Oh, yeah. I'm not saying he doesn't. But it just shows his mindset. His arrogance is so strong that even when God tells him, I'm going to give you this. Once you try it on this guy, and if God told me, if you think so, Chris, why don't you go try it over here? Oh, okay, you win. It's like, I know better. But Satan, no, he couldn't do it. He could not believe that would be impossible for him. And we looked at this, and I thought, could I handle this as well as Job? Could you? Could you handle this as well as Job did? Lose all your family, all your wealth, your own wife turning on you, your friends come and telling you must be the biggest sinner in the world, and not just think, man, maybe you're right. I guess I am. Because if you're following God's will, and then you turn around and say, well, I guess I'm not in a right relationship with God, when you've been doing everything he's told you to do, what are you saying about God? God, you're wrong. This didn't work. Just like the Gentiles who are circumcised, because they think, well, maybe this is what I need to do to be righteous before God. They're making Christ worthless. They're telling God, your way's not working. I need to try something different. And that's what Job would be ultimately saying as well. But he never did. He never lied. Let me put that up here. I think I got it right there. Yeah. Through all this, Job did not sin, nor did he blame God. Job 1:22. And that was after everything had happened. And I think even all the way up to this point, he has not. I think he's had some wrong understandings here and there, but he ultimately, I think, came to the right understanding right here toward the end. And I think that's why it comes to a stop. And then we're going to look at the wisdom from God that Job has in the next three chapters. But when we get to Elihu in chapters 32, I think it's 3 or 4 chapters, I'm going to just summarize all those in one lesson. I don't want to. So when we finish up those 3 chapters from Job, we'll do that in one. So you'll need to read ahead for that. Any other comments or questions you have on this chapter, chapter 27, or any of that discussion?